fluid coding, and AI here. Google's new developer story is not just Gemini in a prompt box, it is AI Studio, Antigravity Desktop, Antigravity CLI, and an SDK or Managed Agents API, all pointed at the same promise: take an idea toward a production app. The real test is simple. Does that feel like one coherent coding system or 4 impressive demos taped together? The standard demo question is, can Gemini write code? That is too small. For developers, the harder question is whether the workflow preserves project state, secrets, files, tests, permissions, and deploy context as the app moves across tools. If the answer is yes, Google has a serious competitor to Cursor, Codex, and Copilot-style coding workflows. If the answer is no, the model can still be strong while the product feels disconnected. At EO 2026, Google framed its developer push as a move from prompts to action. Antigravity 2.0 is described as an agent-first development platform. The new story includes a standalone desktop app, a CLI, an SDK, managed agents in the Gemini API, and expanded AI Studio features. That is a broad surface area. It also creates a clean test: start in the browser, continue locally, automate from the terminal, and then turn one step into programmable agent infrastructure. The safest test app is small, but not fake. Think Team Launch Notes. It pulls launch tasks from a Google Sheet, summarizes status with Gemini, lets a teammate edit the notes, and has a documented path to Cloud Run. That app is intentionally boring in the right ways. It needs structured data, error states, a secret or credential path, a useful interface, and a deploy story. A toy chat box would not test enough. AI Studio is the first gate. Google's claim is that it is becoming a fast path from prompt to production app with workspace integrations, visual customization, mobile access, and direct export to Antigravity. For this test, AI Studio does not need to produce a perfect app. It does need to produce a runnable starting point, connect cleanly to the data source, and leave enough structure that a local coding agent can improve it without rebuilding the project from scratch. The most important AI Studio claim is the handoff. Google says export to Antigravity carries conversation history, project files, and secrets, so you can continue locally. That is the moment where a prompt demo becomes a developer workflow. If Antigravity opens the project with context intact, understands the app goal, and treats secrets safely, the system feels connected. If you have to re-explain everything, repair missing files, or recreate credentials, the handoff failed. Antigravity Desktop is not just another editor tab in this story. Google describes Antigravity 2.0 as a standalone command center for multiple agents, with projects, dynamic sub-agents, scheduled tasks, tools, skills, MCP servers, Chrome interaction, and artifacts. That design can be powerful for a real app because front-ends, back-ends, and deployment files often live in different folders. But it also raises the bar. The agent has to respect boundaries, show reviewable changes, and recover cleanly when it guesses wrong. For Team Launch Notes, local hardening is not glamorous. It means input validation, loading states, useful error messages, a README, and at least one smoke command that proves the app still runs. This is where coding agents either become useful or annoying. A useful agent turns a generated prototype into a reviewable diff. An annoying agent rewrites unrelated files, hides assumptions, or creates changes that only work inside its own conversation. The CLI matters because Google is moving individual Gemini CLI users toward Antigravity CLI. Google says Antigravity CLI became available on May 19, 2026, and that Gemini CLI and Gemini Code Assist IDE extensions stop serving requests for free, pro, and ultra individual users on June 18, 2026. Enterprise users keep access, but for individual developers, this is not just a new option, it is a migration deadline. Google says Antigravity CLI is built in Go, keeps concepts like agent skills, hooks, subagents, and extensions as plugins, and shares the same agent harness as Antigravity 2.0. So the CLI test is not whether it can answer a random prompt. It is whether it can perform a meaningful task in the same project, such as running checks, preparing release notes, or validating deploy configuration without starting from zero context. The SDK and managed agents layer answers a different question. Can this workflow become infrastructure? Google says the Antigravity SDK gives programmatic access to the same agent harness, with custom tools, file system and terminal access, skills, MCP servers, context management, and multimodal ingestion. Managed agents in the Gemini API go further by spinning up an anti-gravity-powered agent in an isolated Linux environment with resumable state. For a production team, that is the difference between using an agent and building an agent-backed workflow. The model side looks credible, with caveats. Google's Gemini 3.5 Flash model card reports 76.2% on terminal, Bench 2.1 55.1% on SWE, Bench Pro public single attempt, 83.6% on MCP Atlas, and 78.4% on OS World verified. Those numbers support a narrow claim. Gemini 3.5 Flash is competitive for agentic coding, tool use, MCP workflows, and UI control. They do not prove the whole Google workflow is coherent. The caveats matter because this video is not grading a model in isolation. Google says Gemini results are generally pass at 1 unless otherwise noted, and SWE Bench Pro results for Gemini models use an internal version of the anti-gravity harness averaged over 5 runs. That is useful evidence, but it is not the same as a public end-to-end test from AI Studio export to desktop agents to CLI automation to SDK or managed agents to deploy path. The best case for Google is integration. AI Studio can start in the browser. Workspace data can make the app useful. Anti-gravity can continue locally. The CLI can automate repeatable work. The SDK or managed agents can turn a task into code. Cloud Run can be the deploy target. No standalone coding agent has that exact Google-shaped stack. If the handoffs work, Google gets an unfair advantage from owning the surfaces around the code. The risk is that each surface is impressive alone but fragile together. Google already says Antigravity CLI will not have one-to-one feature parity with Gemini CLI immediately. The research also found anecdotal community reports about workspace access issues, preview apps breaking after handoff, undue problems, subscription recognition, crashes, and migration frustration. Those reports are not statistical proof. They are smoke signals, and they point at exactly the reliability issues this test should expose. Here is the acceptance bar I would use. The AI Studio app runs. Export preserves enough context to continue. Secrets are either preserved safely or replaced by a clear setup path. Antigravity creates a reviewable diff. A smoke command passes. The CLI performs one useful project task. The SDK or managed agents layer automates one step with explicit inputs and outputs. The deploy path is real, even if the final deploy is a documented command. That is the difference between a demo and a workflow. My practical verdict is this. Google has enough pieces to deserve a serious production-style test, but not enough public evidence to assume the full chain already works. If Team Launch Notes moves from AI Studio to Antigravity to CLI to SDK or managed agents without losing context, breaking deploy assumptions, or hiding risky changes, Google has a real competitor. If every step needs manual repair, then the story is still a bundle of strong demos waiting to become a product. If this helped you separate the benchmark story from the workflow story, like the video and subscribe to Fluid Coding and AI. The next question is the one that actually matters for builders. What happens when the app leaves the demo and starts behaving like a real project?